All right. Hey, folks, it's time for our very last video together. And just like in the poem, where stanzas 1 and 2 early on are about we, and then in the last bit, the poem moves to just I. Your first several videos were we, me, and Mr. Harvey, and this one is just I, Ms. Ellis. But we'll do some good work, and I hope to help you understand a little bit more about how to answer the question, what does it mean? So we're continuing on with journey poems to know the way through poetry. And you guys have done really some great work already this week in the tail end of last. We worked through the first 4 questions. What does it say? What does it show? What connections does it make? How is it arranged? And it is finally time for us to take a look at what does it mean? And I'm just going to go ahead and say if with your poem you're still wrestling with these things, don't jump here yet. But I am going to show you how to think about that when you're ready for it. Okay? So what does it mean? Let me shrink myself here so you can see the words. Again, just like I said, when you're asking what does it mean, the most important thing to do is to make sure that you've really thoroughly thought well about what does it say, what does it show, how is it arranged, and what connections does it make. Most of the errors that I see in students trying to understand a poem are from them not being careful enough or not being thorough enough in those questions. So you want your work to be really, really, really thorough and careful. So as part of getting ready for today, I want you to review your previous work on all of the poems that you've done and think about that. And as you look back over what you answered for say, for show, all those things, you're going to start just wondering, what is the poet showing me? What does he or she want me to see? What is there an opportunity to recognize? What do I notice about how it's arranged? How might some of that come together to help me articulate a meaning? And then just start trying to put things together. Don't worry at first about making it clear or making it good. You can write and rewrite, but you do want a concise, focused, specific meaning statement at the end that's as powerful and effective as it can be. So, what we're going to do right now is actually take a look at a model, and I'm going to show you how I did this work with Journey of the Magi. Okay. So, over here, remember, I've already shown you how I updated what does it say, right? So, man, I've got my summary here. I'm reminding just what does the poem say? Yeah, that's right. About the cold and difficult journey. That's so important. I really understand that in stanza 2, there's a change. Things seem really different. Yep. And all of this about the birth and the death, I think I might be able to make sense of it. It's so interesting to me that he says there was a birth, certainly. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. And man, when any word shows up this many times in a poem, look at that death, death, death. Something's going on there. Birth, birth, birth. I bet I'm supposed to pay attention to that. Okay, so that was a good refresher in terms of what does it say. I'm going to go back to show and I'm going to think, man, this poem really had a lot of images. The poet seemed really interesting in showing things and helping me visualize. And they helped me understand what he was saying. So those images seem really important. Okay. And as I reflect on our arrangements, I'm reminded, we really hung out in that idea a whole lot about stanza 1 being about the journey, stanza 2 being the arrival, and stanza 3 being the reflection. That seemed to be really big. It was almost like an anchor in our work with the poem. There was a lot there that we kept coming back to. So maybe there's something there. And oh, yeah, that's right. The poet really did so much work with setting up those contrasts, how home was different from the journey, because home was summer and comfort and pleasure and hospitality and welcome and regret. He's missing it, and the journey is so miserable. That seems really important too. Good for me to remind myself of. Yeah, and the contrast between the journey and the arrival. That's right. Man, this poet really likes to use a lot of contrasts. That seems really important in terms of how he communicates. Yeah. And then at the end, yeah, that last little sentence seems so important. Okay, so this is good. I'm refreshing myself, thinking about some of the connections now. I've got all these metaphors. Man, so much hostility in this personification. A lot of things here. Done some extra work there. We talked through some of that, even in terms of understanding the illusion. So now it is time for me to think about, what does it mean? And I'm going to think aloud about that just a little bit with you. So I told you when I thought about arrangements, I was really interested in how we kept coming back to that notion of journey, arrival, and reflection. So I really want a meaning statement that helps me get to the heart of the poem and maybe uses some of those things. I mean, this is a rich poem. There's so much I could do. So, but I think I wanted to just describe what the speaker's doing here with these three things. So I'm going to just say in the journey of the Magi, because I always want to start with introducing my poem and making sure I've got that name so my reader knows what I'm talking about. The speaker doesn't have a name. I don't know who he is. I don't know anything about him. I'm just going to call him the speaker. That's what we do when we're talking about poetry. The speaker reflects on a journey, right, that has left him changed forever. Yeah, that seemed to be the really important thing. We talked about that with the birth and the death, and you guys have been talking about that all year. So something about that seems really important. And so that's the reflection. I want to think a little bit about the journey. Some of the ways that in the images and in what does it say that the poet describes the journey, I think I can distill those to help get at the meaning. The journey was miserable. We kept using that word, right? Uncomfortable and lonely, right? Everybody was pushing back and not wanting him to travel, but he kept going on. And then this whole thing about the arrival, there wasn't as much about the arrival, but I remember the main thing being that it was just different than what he thought. The arrival wasn't what he expected. But yeah, that's I think that's really helpful. I've got a little meaning sentence here that talks about what the speaker's doing in the poem. It's reflection, journey, and arrival. So I've kind of gotten all those big ideas together. But it doesn't seem enough to just say the arrival wasn't what he expected. That's not where the poem ends. It doesn't seem to be its main idea or its key point. I think I'm going to keep going and say more. And yet, he wants us, his readers, to know it was a journey worth taking and a story worth remembering. I think that part's so important because I remember that repetition of set down this, right? So that's clearly something that's a central idea. And he was asking all those questions. So it's, if he's bothering to tell us this, part of the importance of the story is that it's worth remembering, it's worth retelling, and trying to understand. Yeah. So that's a really pretty good meaning statement, right? That gets at a lot of the things we talked about in arrangement and still helps me talk about those in a really concise and clear way. So that's good. I'm going to just do another example because I know some of us in the arrangements, I really liked all the different contrasts that were set up. There are so many different contrasts in this poem. When I go back to this, my work with arrangement, right? The journey versus the arrival, the misery versus the satisfaction, the dead of winter, the vegetation of life. And it's all this bad stuff and then all this good stuff. And then I remember in stanza 3, like the weirdness of a birth and a death set against each other. That idea seems really important. I want to play with that one too. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to think, how can I describe those contrasts in an interesting way? And I think sometimes the best way to do that is to take those contrasts and put them right up against each other in a list. So I'm going to do that in, the journey of the Magi. Speaker, again, notice how my stem is exactly the same. In the journey of the Magi, the speaker. What is he doing this year? I'm going to talk about telling a story this time. Tells a story of a journey. I really want to focus on the contrast this time. I like the thought of just pitting them right against each other. It makes the comfortable uncomfortable, pleasant unpleasant. Right? I really like what I've done there. The comfortable is uncomfortable. The pleasant is unpleasant. It has some of that same feel of the tension between stanzas 1 and stanza 2. And it shows how this was the tension in stanza 3, right? I want to talk about this birth and this death, how a birth can lead, or maybe not lead to, but like can be like a death. That makes us long for another death. Or I could say how a birth can lead to a death that makes us long for another death. Not sure which one I like better. I think they're both okay. One of the things I'm trying to show you here is that there are lots of good ways to have a meaning statement that's going to be important and significant. You just want to play around with the ideas. Make sure you get some of those little things fixed so it's clear. I've got two pretty different ones here that are both pretty good, I'd say. Okay, I'm going to do one more. If you're up for a super challenge, this is going to be a challenging, kind of advanced move way to write out your meaning statement. Okay, so if you're up for a challenge, pay attention for this one. And the challenge is when you look at how the poem communicates meaning and what it means. And so that how means looking back at some of the things that you saw come up most in your annotations. So for example, remember when I was looking at the images and I was like, man, he just uses so many images, right? This emphasis on scenery, this emphasis on what else do I want to say? On scenery, on contrasts, right? I love those contrasts. You see me that I keep coming back to those, and kind of the metaphor. And the more I thought about it, the more like the whole poem in terms of the journey really seems like a metaphor, the journey of the Magi there. So I'm going to show you an advanced move to set up a meaning statement, to take into account how the poem means, not just what it means. So in this advanced one, you would say in the journey of the Magi. And this time we're going to talk about the poet because he's the one writing it, right? T.S. Eliot uses a metaphor of the Magi's journey, right? So I'm going to say that I'm going to list a bunch of ways that he does the meeting. So he uses a metaphor of the Magi's journey. He also uses those images, right? Images of, I think we said scenery, right? All those different landscapes down in the valley, the vegetation, the running stream, images of scenery and weather, right? It's cold and dark, summer palaces, and I'm right back. And contrasts between past and present. Present. I can't see behind my computer. Past and present. So notice what I'm doing. I've talked about the how. I've listed 3 different ways that the poet, 3 different devices of style and ways of writing poetry that the poet uses to communicate his ideas. It's not all of them. I'm not going to try to write all of them. That would take forever and it would be miserable. I'm picking just the few that I think are most interesting or that I'd most want to talk about. And contrast between past and present to show what the journey, well, I've said it's a metaphor. Now I'm going to say what it's a metaphor for. Ooh, did you track that? Contrast between past and present to show what the journey toward Christ is like. And then I'm going to talk about the meaning. So first I've said he's going to use all those different things, metaphor, images, and contrasts to show what it's like. And now I'm going to say what he's saying the journey is actually like. The poet asserts that the way is miserable. and the arrival may be only satisfactory. Right, so notice how I'm kind of pulling in some of the things I used from my other meaning statements. The poet asserts that the way is miserable, and the arrival may be only satisfactory. But we return and realize. What do we realize? That whole reflection in stanza 3, how radically different things are now, right? That we are utterly changed, unfit for home, longing for another journey. And I tried to squeeze in that last little bit in the end. Unfit for home, that's not language we used. I don't think I like that. I'm going to change it. I don't want to say unfit for home. I really liked that dispensation work that we did, right? The old ways. I'm going to say uncomfortable in our old ways and longing for another journey. So that's an advanced move, talks about how, and then says what the big ideas are. Notice that I could have just used this sentence, and that would have been a really good meaning statement. It's similar to some of my others. So these are just a few examples of different ways that you could write a meaning statement. So you could use any of these or things like this. Really, what I wanted to show you is you're looking back over the whole poem, you're pulling it all together in your mind, and there are lots of ways to do this well. You're not looking for one magical answer, and if you just find that, it's perfect. These poems are often rich enough that there are lots of ways to get things right, but draw from your reading. Draw from what you've seen of what does it say, what does it show, etc. Okay, that's your walkthrough. What we're going to do now is it's your turn. So in class, I walked you through the template and showed you how to use that. Your job is to take your poem, make sure you've done good work with the first 4 steps and added those, revise and improve it, and you're going to look back over your work and get it as awesome as it can be to hand in. And I do want you to assess. This is a lot that we've taken on here. You guys have done great work, but part of your process is going to be to come back to class and sort of figure out where you are, so you can self-assess where you are right now in your poetry process. Have you done strong, thorough work with all 4 of the first questions? Are you ready to answer what does it mean? If your answer is yes, then go for it. You're ready to go. But if you're not ready to answer what does it mean, if you still are puzzled about a lot of your first 4 questions, you feel lost or confused, don't jump ahead to what does it mean. Stay in those 4 questions. And instead, what I want you to do is all of that work, the 4 questions, and then tell me what your questions are and tell me what you need help with. Okay? There you are, folks. That wraps up our very last of the poetry process videos. This was What Does It Mean? Watch it again, and I'll have these slides posted in the module as well for reference for you. Okay, see ya.